members of the United States administration could be parroting that sort of disinformation.
From your perspective, who could be these people around Trump who are providing such information to the US president about mistakes of the Russian army? Who could be those people? It seems like Trump did not refer to some intelligence operations, to some intel information.
Yes, I mean, again, I think this is what's so worrying about the current situation. We all know that the United States intelligence apparatus, their interagency structure, is frankly unrivaled in the world. They have fantastic intelligence agencies. They have incredible reach. They have incredibly professional intelligence operators and analysts backed up by some of the best intelligence technology in the world. But what isn't happening at the moment, seemingly, is that the deduction from that intelligence architecture isn't finding its way into President Trump's decision-making. And whether that's because he's willfully ignoring it, whether because he's not taking the briefings, whether it's because those briefings are somehow being diluted by political advisors, it's almost impossible to tell. But I simply do not accept any suggestion that the United States intelligence apparatus, that we all have great faith in, doesn't know what's going on. Of course it does. But it's not finding its way into what comes out of President Trump's mouth, shall we say that. I don't know what goes on in his head. We can only see what comes out of his mouth and what he puts out on social media. So who is it who's giving him this kind of bizarre, perverse version of events? I don't know. You'd have to speak to people better placed than me as to who President Trump really listens to, other than his obvious administration advisors.
According to Reuters, Steve Witkoff proposed Trump to give up 4 Ukrainian regions to Russia as a part of a peace deal. According to this Reuters sources, according to Steve Witkoff, this could be the best way forward, the fastest way to broker a ceasefire in Ukraine. What could such a deal mean for Ukrainian global security, and how can you assess this Steve Witkoff's initiative?
Yeah, and if you look at that with General Kellogg's comments, which I thought were again very naive and disrespectful to Ukraine, this idea that somehow you could carve up Ukraine in the image of Berlin after the Second World War, where, as your viewers will know, Berlin was split into international zones between the Soviet Union, the United States, Great Britain, and France, and that somehow that sort of model could be used in Ukraine. It is playing so strongly into President Putin's hands. You know, the whole point about a negotiation when it comes is you've got to have cards to play. And if you cede everything with that sort of proposal, then you go into the peace process with no cards to play. But more importantly, what does that then say about the rules-based international system that we all rely on? The sovereignty of Ukraine, that regions of Ukraine would be given up in that manner, I think is very damaging. And so I would have every sympathy with President Zelensky not entertaining such an approach.
Let's also cover UK and France-led coalition of the willing. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron are organizing this big coalition of the willing, troops to be deployed to Ukraine after full ceasefire deal. What is your assessment of this plan?
Well, look, I have to say, I think it was smart of Prime Minister Starmer and President Macron to come up with something, a coalition of the willing, because in the absence of the United States, somebody has got to do something. if there were to be a peace deal, then you've got to back it up with some kind of monitoring force. So politically, it seems to me that was a smart move by France. It was a smart move by the United Kingdom to do that, not least to say to the United States, we're listening. We're listening when you say that Europe needs to do more. So politically, I get it. Do I get it strategically and operationally? Not so much. So what do I mean by that? So firstly, it is entirely unclear to me, based on anything that has been publicized by the United Kingdom or anybody else, what the big idea of this force would be. Is it a peacekeeping force? There's some random phrases being bandied around about what the force's mission might be, without total clarity on the purpose, on the mission. Then you're in danger of running into a real disaster. And I have seen nothing to suggest if the true objective, if the true mission is understood, it certainly has been communicated very effectively. So I've seen nothing that I, as a military commander, would recognize to be a credible basis for a mission. It feels muddled at this stage. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, even once you have decided on what the mission is, and let's hope it is credible, pulling together a coalition of a willing into a credible military force is exceptionally difficult in the absence of, firstly, the United States, who have typically led coalitions of the willing. I think back to the counter-ISIS campaign as if, for instance, a US-led coalition. If it's going to be led by other nations, in this case, potentially the United Kingdom and France, where's the command and control going to come from? Because the big headquarters that could do it are NATO headquarters. And the idea that President Putin is going to permit a NATO-assigned headquarters to deploy into Ukraine, again, feels like a total fool's errand. And then come down a level, ensuring that force has the necessary credibility to do its job, I think there's a very, very long way to go. And so ministers will be saying, and they have been saying, that the planning is well advanced. Well, I hope so. But it's not what I am sensing. I'm sensing this feels like more of a political process than a true operational process. And I think it'd be very, very dangerous for Britain, for France, for these other nations involved in the coalition of the willing, to deploy a force unless the mission is very, very clear. At this stage, it seems to me that it's not.
Thank you, General Jones, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Glory to Ukraine.
If Putin shows no willingness at all, which is the case at the moment, to accept a ceasefire or to compromise at all on his war objectives for Ukraine, they're completely unmodified, then the likelihood is that, Trump does have to toughen his stance and toughen his position.
Also, he has been threatening sanctions, secondary tariffs against Russia. However, it seems also that he is providing Vladimir Putin with lots of time. He is not setting any kind of a quick deadline for this. What is the reason why Trump is has a so friendly stance with Putin and giving him a lot of time for this decision on a full ceasefire?
Well, in a way, I think I've argued that an early ceasefire is not to Ukraine's advantage. So, but look, Trump has got, he's done an awful lot quickly, and a lot of it's been done spontaneously without it's difficult to detect, where there's a plan, where there's a strategy. And at the moment, there's huge preoccupation, as you're well aware, with the tariff issue. and the relationship with China and the modification of that and the chops and the